So with that, I'll start. So as the name suggests that this device edge computing and AI, why we are calling it a next frontiers for IoT and robotics. So this robotics is there for a long time. Now I think we are there and everything. But I think in the past years, suddenly the AI is actually creating a lot of difference in these two fields. But when it tried to do that, use that AI initially, that IoT part, the way IoT and robotics was done, people thought that we just collect that in the IoT devices, I'll collect the data from robots, but I'll do all my processing in the cloud. And that is how the IoT came up. The Internet of Things is all about sending all the data from things to the internet, to the cloud. And you do all the processing there. But that is that system actually, I would say, in most of the cases, it didn't work. And that is why this new concept of coming as edge computing has come up. And how do we actually bring intelligence into that is going to be the crux of my talk. So just to set the context, that if you see on the left hand side is a very standard diagram of the IoT or robotic, any robotic system, where in the lowest most layer you have these sensors on everything. Every object that we have, we'll put sensors on it. Usually that data is collected and we use some internet connected gateway to send that data back to the cloud, and you start putting some applications on that. And that infrastructure platform I was telling is basically the cloud. Usually that is what you call that way. And the robotics part is very similar to this. The only difference is two things, that sometimes instead of putting sensors physically on things, we can put sensors on the robots and or drones or some moving machines which can move around to collect data. So that is, so they can be carriers of sensors, or they can also actuate, or that respond part that you got the topmost that is there, they can actually go and change something. They can pick up things, they can move things, they can do something. So that two together is the robotics part that comes in. But software architecture wise is a very similar. The sense, extract, analyze, respond is the cycle it will go through. So from the edge computing perspective, what it means is that instead of doing that analytics or that AI part of it in the infrastructure of the cloud, how much of that we should do on this side of the internet. What I mean by that is the bottom part, the gateway side, this side of the internet. This side of the internet is the edge, and this side is the cloud, the top side. So whatever we can do on this side is the edge computing. So that is the scope of my how we can make intelligent edge. So before we move into that, the one very interesting thing that I wanted to cover, if you look at this diagram, that it kind of tries to show that when you want to do this kind of thing, one side you need the sensing capability, or you need the knowledge of sensing, which comes from the chemical biological transducer. Hello? Yeah. So physical chemical. So am I audible? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So this physical, chemical, biological transducers, mobiles, wearable sensing. So there's a whole lot of sensing, which I would analogously call it. It is more of instrumentation and electronics. That's what it is there in the sensing side of it. The computing side is actually about the algorithms, the networks, and the thing that how you handle the signals. Those things are there. But as we see, when we apply the intelligence into it through my analytics using AI, without the knowledge of the science of what is behind that sensing, which can be a life sciences or a physical science or a behavior. So basically, depending upon whether I am sensing a inert object or a live object or a person, depending upon that, actually the science knowledge will come in, because if you see the analytics is nothing but an inverse function of the sensor is a transducer which converts a physical event into an electrical signal. And all your analytics you do is basically you analyze that signal to understand that what happened in that event. Effectively, that's what you do. And for that, this science knowledge is also very important. So it is a kind of a triad of these three multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary thing that has to come in. And the edge computing actually, you'll see that it brings another dimension complexity into that whatever we do, we have to implement in embedded hardware. And that brings in the other angle. So which this together, it makes a very interesting and challenging field to work on. And as I was telling that what I mean by this intelligent edge computing is nothing but this novel embedding of AI to augment the traditional sensing, networking, signal processing, vision and control-based system. So this is very important to understand that all these side roads, sensing, networking, signal processing, vision and control, these are almost 25, 30, 40-year-old fields. They are very, very mature fields. But interesting, what we are trying to do is how we can augment this traditional way to do these 5 jobs. How do we bring AI into it? But still we do it in an embedded device, in a small footprint device, power constrained device. How do we do it? So that is the kind of the area that this edge computing is trying to cover. So again, that's what it. So these are all very old things. 25, 30, 40 years, all these technologies are there. So why suddenly this is becoming a buzzword? So this is becoming because of some 4 key drivers, and these are all commercial drivers. If you see what has happening, the cost of sensors is coming down. It always happens in any electronics. If you have certain volume, it's a critical volume, when you cross, suddenly you see a lot of cost reduction. That's what is happening in the sensor world today. The cloud also same way, because of the usage, it is becoming quite mature and quite cheap. The capacity of the internet is getting better, and that is also getting cheaper. And the most importantly, if you see, there are new computing platforms. And what I see, I've given some 6 pictures here. These are all computers to us, isn't it? Whether this is a smartphone or the smartwatch or a ground vehicle or a robotic arm or a humanoid or a drone, each of them may have a compute power which is much more than a PC compute power. Even 5 years back in our home, whatever you used to have, this has a compute power more than that. So these actually, and this affordable pervasive computing is actually what is making the edge computing viable. And suddenly this is becoming a kind of a big buzzword. So just to set the context, that because we will be talking about the AI, so I thought that is a very kind of a summary to make sure that I think most of the people in this group will be very much knowing this, but I want to put everything in the same level. So I think, so as a context, I set it. So one part of it is about when we talk about the AI thing and the analytics, we have to understand that we are basically kind of climbing the knowledge pyramid, where we start with the raw data from the sensor, and then slowly first derive the contextual information like who did what, where and when, which is more also called a descriptive analytics. Then from that contextual information, we build the knowledge model. And knowledge model means what? That not only understand the context, but we actually try to understand how actually this thing got generated. You remember I told there is an event and there's a transducer, and then you get electrical signal. So raw data, I'm looking at that sensor data. So from that sensor data, can I actually understand how actually the filters got generated? What was the physical event? So that is what the diagnostic part, isn't it? And same thing that the doctors can look at our symptoms, which I would call as a sensor data. And they can look at my temperature, I can tell that, try to diagnose what has happened. So that is, I would call this knowledge-driven diagnostic analytics. That's what you do. Going beyond that, you actually try to go slightly more and try to get the insight about it. And try to understand not only about how it happened, why it happened. So try to understand something. Once you understand why it happened, you can also start predicting it. Because we have something on which you can actually tell what is going to happen because you know those parts. So that part tells you the predictive analytics. And then finally, what we call as the wisdom, and which is I would call at a level when some AI reaches there, it will be almost at level of human intelligence. Very rarely it is that, but slowly things are going there. So there, what you start doing is not only about the how, who, how, and why. You also have to understand that. So suppose something happened which is good, then I should know what I should do again to make that good happen again. That event, or if some event that happened was bad, then I should actually try to know how to prevent it. It is same way. The doctor can actually diagnose you to have some disease, but ultimately doctors will give you prescriptions. to actually tell that, okay, that is a prescriptive part, that you don't do this, you do this, you eat this, you don't eat that. So that becomes the prescriptive part, which actually is the kind of ultimate, I would call the holy grail of intelligence, what is the wisdom part. So effectively, if you see, this is the knowledge pyramid that any intelligence system as you can process the data, and as obvious that the lower part of the thing is what actually was traditionally done in IT earlier, and now with the AI coming in, we are not climbing to the upper side, and the upper side of the pyramid is where actually AI is actually better. Like if you see the non-AI analytics, it is all about programming the rules and association, reasoning, optimization into that system. AI system don't, they actually learn those rules and associations and reasons and optimize. So basically, and this solve. So if AI systems are nothing but whatever you're programming in the non-AI system as a programmed AI system try to learn it automatically. And that is also kind of seen in the left or lowermost left part of the diagram. If you consider that what I've given this traditional programming versus machine learning paradigm, I don't know whether you have realized this. This kind of is a big paradigm shift of traditional computer science. IT is about you have a program and you input a data and you get output. That's what we are used to do. Yeah, still we do that way. But if we see as a from a software engineer perspective, when a machine learning is coming, what you are giving is actually you are giving the data and you are giving the labels of the data which I'm telling as output. And computer, what it churns out is the program, or we call it the model. So effectively, the complete, there's a paradigm shift in the way we look at these software systems. So that is one thing that we should keep in our back of the mind. And the second thing that I wanted to bring in as the A part, again, because I'm going to touch base, I'm not going to go into the details of machine learning, deep learning, and we're going to talk more about their applications and implications. But conceptually, machine learning is a traditional way of having some input and some output, which is kind of told that this is good, bad, some kind of, and then the system tries to learn by doing this feature extraction classification on its own. So basically, it is more like I will tell that in the traditional regression or some kind of suppose I have given input and output, and I have given I am told that there is a linear relation between input and output. My machine learning actually helps me to find out the coefficients of those equations. So suppose there are 10 unknowns. So basically, I can tell my yi is a summation ai xi, and I equal to 1 to 10. So my machine, so that equation in learning system, and that is usually that known part comes from the feature extraction part of the thing, but we actually have to know that. And once we know that, the actual machine learning simplest form of that will be that regression equation where actually we find out those AIs given AI, Y, and Xi are known. So effectively, that's what it is. If machine learning is about. In deep learning, the advantage is actually what happens is that yi equal to summation ai xi, that mathematical relation is not known. So deep learning actually first learns that there is a linear relation, and it also tries to solve for those parameters or coefficients of the weights of that equation together. So deep learning actually runs it together. So that's why it is so popular, because you don't need to understand anything, you can just do it. But I'll touch base of it later, but I wanted to introduce it here so you can think about it. The very reason why deep learning is so good or so popular is also a reason of its own. There's an issue here of, you don't know what is happening in there. So I'll bring a concept of explain or interpretability at the later stage of my talk. But I think you can just keep this in the back of your mind that this is the reason that deep learning systems, they learn both the equation and the coefficient of the equation together. But doing that, it does actually, you don't know what equation it has learned. There is a problem there. And because of that, we cannot explain the relation between the input and the output. And what are the implications of that? I'll cover that later. So any question up to this time? Okay, so I'm just proceeding to the next thing. So now I'm just going to introduce the concept of the device edge computing and why do we need it. So just the first diagram I told, it is I think another view of that diagram. So it is just inverted view of you have the devices and sensors in the top, and then you have the different aggregation devices, and then you have the cloud. So effectively, the edge is on the top side of it, and there is a very nice study report from Deloitte. It has come out just last year, which has kind of told that how exactly the AI is going to get deployed. If you see from left to right, the left side is your cloud, and you move slowly towards from cloud, you move to your network. The middle part is the network. Then you move to your enterprises kind of the edges, and then in the simplest thing, we have your consumer edge devices, which I would call the thing that we have in our home. That today you have a smart TV in your home, you have a mobile phone, you have a smart watch. So those consumer devices, even sometimes your today microwaves and lights, everything are getting connected to that. Yeah. So those are edge devices at your consumer. So that is the rightmost side, the consumer edge. And so it is a kind of a continuum from you move from this side to the left side and you go more towards the cloud and all. The things that are kind of marked in red is actually the scope that I am going to bring in. So the edge that I put in my enterprise factories, I can put a computing factory. In a factory, I can put a machinery, I can put a computer there to actually do some analysis. So that is I will call as an enterprise edge, or even the robot that is there, or even something, maybe a autonomous car that is moving around inside a warehouse. Yeah, so all those things are enterprise edge platforms. I explain the consumer edge. The telecom edge in between is it is not only about you can do your computation only on those things today, isn't it? Because that is where the sensing is happening, and I can do the computation there also. But other places what you can do the computation is also you have a lot of computing power in your network. All the gateways and switches and routers, they also have a CPU, they also have a memory. So as the packets and data goes through them, you can actually do some analytics and you can do something on that also. So that is usually called the telecom edge, or we have another name for it, fog computing. So this is edge computing, and it is called fog, and then it goes to the cloud. So that is the kind of context I wanted to bring in, that when you talk it, so you have a mind map that you know that where that thing is happening. The second thing that is coming, and this is again, it is a validation from the market that yes, this is going to be a big thing as we go forward. So this is a projection again from the Deloitte report. So it's very short term year, that is 2020 to 2024, or 4 years. So it is kind of trying to predict how many million units of edge AI chips, the chips that actually are going to enable AI on edge devices, how they are going to grow. And if you see that, I have marked that, so enterprise edge is going to grow by 5 times, from 50 to go to is 50 million to 250 million units is going to grow. And same way, if you see smartphone is going to double, wearable is also going to double. So tablet speaker is, so see that is not, we know that these are kind of dying. They are not really that market, but these three are going to grow again and again. And they are not shown about the part. The enterprise edge actually includes the robots also. And so the wearables and the smartphones and the enterprise edge, which includes robots, drones, and also some, I would call static machines in the factories and all. So that is going to, but they're going to grow like anything. So that is the first thing, that is there's a clear market driver where you see a trend in that. Now coming to the motivation, why edge? So this is, I think, one of the most important slides of today, because these are all my talk will be actually homing into these 4 drivers. And this came out in very recently in Gartner report, but effectively this is a kind of once you understand, is a very simple thing. Why we need to do the computation in the edge, and why, and I cannot go back to the cloud. So suppose think of an intelligent systems, and I'm say simple, I'm sensing a temperature, and based on the temperature data, I have to decide whether there is a fire in the room or not. And if there's a fire, I have to send a drone to douse that fire. If that is a very simple autonomous system you have to do, ideally speaking, I can get the temperature data and send it back to a cloud and analyze. But suppose that logic, suppose what is the problem there to do it? The first problem that comes is the first problem here, latency. Suppose I want to do it in real time. So if I want to do it in real time, and I cannot tolerate the latency of the internet, and you know the latency of the internet, even the speed of light also is also around the earth. If you go, it will be hundreds of millisecond latency will come. So today, if I connect hit a Amazon server in USA, which is hosted in USA, the round trip will be in hundreds of milliseconds. That even without any and actual load. If you see anybody who knows, if you ping your server, you see usually 700 millisecond, 800 millisecond is 400 millisecond is a very common latency that is there in the internet. So the point is, if I had a real-time application of sensing the data, analyzing it, and responding to it in real time, I cannot afford to send it back to the cloud. I have to do it locally. So that is the first driver of the edge computing. Second driver, suppose even if the latency is okay, I can tolerate that latency. We don't really understand this today. We use our phones, use our and we have some data plan. We are okay with sending that data because whatever we do, it is human generated data. We don't do it all the time. But when we have a machine connected to the internet and it goes on, every second maybe or every millisecond it is sending data, and there are thousands of such sensors are deployed, the cost of that bandwidth may not be limited. And it is reality. Actually, if you see many of the real practical implementation, this bandwidth cost is actually a significant cost which people are not ready to pay for. So from the sensor data continuously sending to the internet is not something so there is a cost issue there. So it will be preferred that I don't send it and do it on the edge itself. Third is, even if I am okay with the latency and the bandwidth cost, still, if you see, there is an issue of a reliability. So even if everything is fine, internet, it may happen at some point it just drops. I don't get a connection. So if I'm doing a critical operation, suppose my sensor is supposed to sense some anomaly in my machine operations in my factory, and if the anomaly is there, I have to immediately stop the machine. I cannot afford to send it back to the cloud where there is a flaky internet connection can make that. So even if something goes wrong, I will be able to get notified on it, and the system will not stop in auto. So this autonomy becomes limited if we really use the net. So that is become the third thing. And the fourth on the bottom left is the fourth angle, which is typically true only for the personal data. Even if I am okay with the latency, bandwidth, and not that reliability part of the thing, still I may not want my data to go. And this is typically the privacy security problems. So there is a privacy issue of personal data. We are not going to go out like we don't want it to go out, and we want to do it on locally. I'll show you some examples of that. Or there are security issues, like no bank today will actually they'll try to do it on their own network once a year. They will not try to send this data to the cloud because there is a security issue and the financial transaction data may actually, so they'll be becoming more prone to hacking. So this kind of four things actually drives the edge computing. I think it is clear now. And given that background, what kind of applications that are coming in. So I think this is a slightly complex slide, but let's kind of a simple part. If you think about it, that is three things here: business, people, and things. So the applications that operate at the intersection of things and business are typically the IoT applications. They always have this edge requirement, number one. Second kind of application which has this edge is actually a thing that operate in the intersection of business and people, which are typically what you call as immersive experience application, or more, I think technology term, we call it AR, VR, XR. So augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality kind of applications. Those kind of applications, again, because it is understood that they are kind of very, very media rich. And again, you are seeing something there, and on the basis of seeing, you have to augment something on top of what you are seeing. That analysis, again, it's a classically required that if you do it on the edge itself. So this is the second one. And third is the thing that operates between I would call intersection between the things and the people, are typically the robotics kind of application. especially what you call as a collaborative robotics that kind of works with people, robots that work with people, those have their play in that direction, which is kind of immersive interaction. So there also it is understood that if the robot actually has to say it is moving around and it is kind of coming in front of a person, and then it has to stop, and it is sensing something, but if the analysis of that is sensing an image of me, but if the analysis of that the image has to be sent to the cloud and to understand that yes, something is wrong, and then the comment comes back, again there is a problem. So effectively this kind of actually will need, it's preferred to do it at the edge. So these are so classically you'll see all most of the edge use cases will fall in one of these three categories, either IoT or robotics or AR VR exactly. And example wise, as I told you, why so this is becoming quite hot. So everybody is into this. Like if you see, Sony has built a AI into their CMOS image sensor. So it will kind of, there's AI chip into the sensor itself now, and it will build a smart camera through that. So Sony has already done that. So there are companies like different people who are building sensor edge. HP has a whole set of hardware which they're calling as a edge line. So it's slightly more ruggedized industrial kind of edge devices. That is, they have it. Intel has gone one step beyond that. They are not only actually they are building, so they want to sell their chips, but they are actually building a complete software ecosystem for the edge, which they call as OpenVINO. You can Google it and find us. Intel OpenVINO architecture is there, which actually allows people to program for the edge devices that has Intel chips. Program AI for those edge devices. So that's what that. On the technology side or the research side of it, that again, that there are so challenges in that part. And as this diagram is telling, there's one study that was done by Carnegie Mellon University, where they clearly identified in this edge part, there are a lot of challenges will come in the hardware, in the context of edge AI and the hardware software co-design, privacy, security, and how do you actually allocate computation and data in the edge devices, and how do the research. So there's a lot of distributed computing, hardware, embedded, and privacy security. These are the areas where the edge computing is posing the technology challenges. These are the research areas. And below, if you see, there are IEEE, I have given reference to 2 papers from IEEE proceedings. The special issues came on edge intelligence. If you can find, you just read these 2 papers. The confluence of edge computing and AI, and also the paving the last mile of AI with edge computing. Both these papers are extremely good survey papers of what is happening in this world. The other thing that I am kind of put in the top right is also about, it is very, I think if you introspect what is happening here, you see this, what is happening here is very analogous to what has happened to use of PCs in the enterprise in 90s. Because early from 80s, PCs were in the home, and in 90s, PCs started moving into the offices and now enterprises and started replacing those mainframes. So we had the mainframes, from there we moved to PC. If you think of the analogy, it is a similar analogy. We are now moving from cloud to edge now. So from that, so mainframe we moved to PC, from PC we moved to cloud. Now from cloud we are again coming back to edge. So this is a kind of a zigzag, it's a cycle. So we are going through that cycle again, but there's a difference. The difference is about, and why this is a challenging problem compared to that PC thing that happened in 90s, that there's no standardization in hardware. And the basic fact that because there's so much different kind of sensing devices, there cannot be any standardization. In PC, there was a standard. So there's only 1 or 2 architectures of PC. Even in mobile phone, there are only 1 or 2 architecture that was there. And the software stack is also, if you see, it was very uniform. Windows, Mac, Linux. In mobile, it is only Android or iOS. So there is a very uniformity in this. So it is not that difficult. But problem is, if you have n number of software stacks and k number of hardware configuration, where n and k both are very large, then you are kind of looking at a n cross n into k possibilities or options, which is not very easy to optimize. What I understand, the data and the computation allocation, the optimization to do across all those things is not easy. So that makes this a very challenging problem. And that's what actually kind of brings in the need of orchestrating can I automate this thing? I'll talk about it later, but effectively that's what it is. So finally, before I move into the applications, so if you see the why this is challenging, from if I go to the ground, what is happening? Effectively, why this is different is there in that bottom, the middle circle. When I go on edge are always constrained CPU, memory, battery life, and reduce size, weight, cost devices. This is purely from economics. So any edge device will be always have lower clock speed, lower CPU, lower memory, lower battery life, and usually have a size, weight, cost limitation depending upon the application. Like if I put the edge device on a drone, I know that you cannot make a processor which weighs more than 1 kg. I cannot do that. So that's such things to come out. So battery cannot be. So that is basically makes this thing challenging. So effectively, with those constraints, effectively what we need to do, we have to now see how quickly we can analyze the data. I think kind of it's coming back to that same 4 motivation things I told. I'm kind of coming back to that again, that in a different view. So how quickly you can analyze the data, even though I have a constant CPU and memory, my real-time sensing and control application. How we can synchronize the input data, because that will be required for any kind of multi-sensor fusion requirement. How I can reduce the data volume that I can need to transmit. So this will actually save my battery power, conserve my bandwidth, and improve my latency and preserve privacy. These are the 4 things anyway we talked about. This comes here. And other thing is the visibility of the data. So many times even all these things are there if the analytics needs to be done globally. Like suppose I'm sensing, it's simple. Suppose I'm I'm sensing the current electricity consumption data using a smart meter from home. But the analysis of that actually needs data from all the neighborhoods, all my homes, all the homes in my neighborhood. So that analysis cannot be done in the edge because it is not local. That it needs global data. So that is where actually the edge is becomes some. So there are new concepts like federated learning, and I'll talk about it a bit. That how global models and local inferencing can actually help in that. So effectively, I'm trying to now coming into the computer science aspect of edge. That this is what if you see the CS aspect of edge, where we have to look into. Any question till that this time? Hello. Any questions? Okay, I'll just proceed to the next thing. So next is I'll talk about what I think is the main part of my talk will be this application use cases, or what are the applications of edge computing. I will give some examples. So first set of examples are actually from what is happening in the other side of the world. Many of these are taken from the Intel's AI at that thing, and there are other also. But if you see on the top, there are applications that are coming mostly on the top. If you see all 5 applications are on the healthcare side. So it is something like in the manufacturing of the contact lens, the quality control of the contact lens. You sense that there is something wrong in the quality of the contact lens and you immediately correct it because they are extremely sensitive. So it is something that you have to do the analysis. So in the edge by looking at the camera, use a camera to look at the quality and then detect the thing. You will see a whole set of cardiac applications where you look at the cardiac, and then but like this cardiac ultrasound or AI for cardio, so that you actually take the ECG or other kind of sensing from the which actually gives us the cardiac parameters, but the analysis of that has to be done in real time locally. So there's quite a few such applications. Like you don't expect this cardiac ultrasound machine to be connected to the cloud or the other kind of cardiac analysis that they are doing. So this has to be done locally. Same way during operation, pneumothorax detection, medical image. So these are classic cases where actually you need to run AI on the edge using, and mostly almost all these examples are actually uses camera as a sensor or ECG and other kind of sensors. But effectively after that, you need to run the AI on the edge. That is one set of applications. On the other side, if you see, there's a retail application like this Vispera thing, where actually it is automatic of the shelf inspection for optimal inventory management. It's something like that, that the camera should look at this, or some sensor should look at the shelf, and they call it automatic replenishment. So if some things are selling more, then you should actually procure more of that from the warehouse. You have to actually replenish the shelf with that item. So the shelf is never vacant. So now these such systems are completely automated, and as I understood, it is better done. It is a there is a pseudo real timeness into this, and that's why it is better done in the edge, in the store itself, as I sense. Same way, there's another angle. Some people now, there are a lot of stores where actually there's automated checkout. You pick up things, put in your trolley, it automatically detects what you have taken, and you walk out. But people are finding out way to bypass it. There are things happening. So how can you detect or to stop the scaling? That is the other thing. Then smart city. Smart city, you put the surveillance cameras. But how do you use the surveillance camera in automated? Can I create an automated traffic signal control using a smart camera? Then it cannot go back to the cloud. It's a very, very real time thing. So then full AI has to run on the edge itself, on the maybe traffic light itself. Then this pipe cleaning robot that is there, or to bring in touch to robots. The touch is very extremely low latency requirement. Touch. So I cannot. You can. I think audio video. If you transport it over the internet, we can actually. If you see audio, video actually 100 millisecond, 200 millisecond delay is acceptable latency wise. Video also 30 millisecond, 50 millisecond delay is quite acceptable. Nobody bothers. But when you bring to touch anything, we have to look at 10 millisecond or below latency. Then only you can actually do it. So you have to again to do it in edge. And same way, in the next frontier for edge will be the space, isn't it? So that is also edge computing. If you think of a satellite as a sensor, which is sensing, looking at the Earth, then also I can think of that satellite as edge computer, because it is sitting on the edge of that network. And if you see, Xilinx is already bringing out space-grade AI processors for such kind of things. Now coming to, like, I'll talk about some of the TCS, we are working with our customers. And these are all real life use cases that we are seeing in the last 2-3 years. These are kind of proliferating in a very large number. And we see these 4 classes of applications. So one class of application, what we are calling is this material and machine inspection in mostly manufacturing and other vertical, mostly factory applications. Different kind of detection, defect detection, process quality control, structural health monitoring kind of application is what is there in that. That is one class of applications. Second class of application is about on the people sensing side. So sensing the physiology or active software people, but effectively it is mostly in the healthcare, remote patient monitoring, or also in the non-healthcare stage. There is elderly care, which is coming up big way in many of the, in India it is still okay, but many countries like Singapore, Japan, they are very, very aging countries. So there, this automation of this elderly care has become a very important thing. All factories, they have these worker safety issues. So that also is an important thing that has to be given. So that is a human sensing class of application. Then bottom left, what we call as a cognitive robotic applications. So where actually the robots too. So robots can be, and to explain this, so there is a concept of a telepresence or a teleoperation. So what you mean by that is actually robot can represent you remotely. You can drive a robot, which is maybe 2000 miles away. It can actually see, instead of you going to meet somebody, a robot can go and meet you as an avatar of yourself. And it may think, but I think after this COVID pandemic at stuck, and we are kind of stuck at work from home, this requirement is shooting up like anything. So there is a serious requirement of many of companies asking for telepresence robots. So where people can actually, without physical meeting, whether they can meet with a robot. Robot can be meeting on behalf of them. What it does, I will cover that later. Or teleoperation, like it is not only about meeting, but I can operate. It can be telesurgery, which is a very, I think, slightly more futuristic. But suppose I want to repair a machine, but I don't want to fly. I don't want to go. And this is a very typical requirement. I'll give you an example of, say, say Boeing or some aircraft engine. The aircraft engine, if you see, if a specialized repair, if it has to be done, that it has to be done by that person. Maybe he has to fly for 8 hours to repair something for half an hour. So it's an extremely inefficient system. The person's time is, because they are very specialized with things. So can they now sit 2,000 miles away and have a robot teleoperate and repair? That is a kind of a thing that is called a teleoperation. So that is the other class. And the fourth class of things I told, it's about remote sensing. As I was telling, the satellite or drone remote sensing is the fourth class of application, which is there for surveillance, defense, then sustainability, disaster management, structural monitoring. Many such applications are coming where you use the drones or the satellite to use the data. So all these are actually very, very strong use cases for edge sensing plus edge AI. And they're all real customer, we are actually, each of these, we are actually working with our customers to provide solutions in these areas. So some examples. So I talked about healthcare. So this is one typical example of this is actually what we call as a implantable loop recorder, which I think is to simply put, it is a pacemaker, implanted pacemaker, which can measure your ECG on the fly. So such systems are actually now put in. So anybody who has this atrial fibrillation condition, and many years, so they actually now put this kind of in India also. Many people actually have this implanted in that way. So what it does is it actually measures ECG 24/7 and uses your mobile. It sends this to a mobile phone, and via mobile phone it goes to your cloud, that ECG data, and then somebody looks at that data, or some AI system looks into the data, and if something goes wrong, and you can detect this, if you can detect it, like what is told is that this atrial fibrillation condition, which kind of leads to a heart attack as you go forward, usually even 48 hours, 72 hours before it happens, the ECG actually starts going bad, and there is some patterns that comes up. So such systems, if you detect, you can easily actually control those problems. So, and you see this, why it is a edge. So now it is implanted. So implanted means the biggest problem is it has to be low weight size. Not only that, it also has to be low battery, because that battery has to last 3 to 7 years. I cannot every day open up. It has to be surgically put inside by opening up the chest. So you cannot do it every time. So that makes it a kind of low battery, low size weight, non-real time, but privacy preserving. So that's why it is a very interesting edge use case. How do we kind of analyze this ECG data on that device, or maybe on my mobile phone that is with me in that itself? I don't send the data back to the cloud. This is one example. Second example, completely going to another direction. This is a company who actually builds car seats. I would call, they build the best car seats in the world. They are the largest car seat manufacturer in the world. In the USA, they're located. So they're extremely finicky about the quality of the car seats. So what they want to know, there's a seat ring that at it, you can see there's an assembly line picture. So the seat is getting manufactured and is moving in the assembly line. And if it has to detect if there is any wrinkle in that leather that has been there, if there's a wrinkle, they will reject it, and the rejection has to happen in the real time as a quality control. And so, and because not only that, it has to also maybe have some parameter has to be tuned in the process so that the wrinkle can be corrected. So again, the challenge, if you see, it is not that difficult to do this with a deep learning camera, like we had the 450 GB of data. Seat images captured at different camera angles. It is not that difficult to detect this using deep learning. But the problem is, if I want to learn this on real time on that factory itself on a small computer, it is not that easy. Okay, so that makes this problem actually more difficult to look at. Third example, again, this is also our in-house example of, it is a steel plant. It is actually a picture from our Tata Steel plant. So it is the blast furnace of the Tata. You saw that this is the blast furnace actually has a chute or a slide through which actually you can see that something that goes up. You feed the coal through that. So what happens is this coal is actually, before it fed into this chute and it goes to the blast furnace through this here, it actually is stored normally in the open space, in the ground, field, and all the other places. So what happens? It also gets contaminated with a lot of other things like concrete, wood, plastic. Some things will come in. So if they, and the problem is when everything is covered in coal dust, so everything looks black. So we cannot put a camera to detect whether they. So as it goes through, you cannot allow those impurities to go inside the crusher or the furnace, because either the crusher blade will break, or if a plastic goes in the furnace, the quality of the temperature quality of the furnace will change, so the steel quality will be changed. So it has to be detected before it is fed. So here again, you can think of this as how we do is a real-time application, and it cannot do with only a RGB camera. We did it with a polarization camera, which kind of gives you an idea of that material also. So and then we have to do it in real time. At 30 FPS, that data is coming, and within 1 second or 2 seconds, I have to use that data to detect. Like you can see that it has to be removed from the bell within 90 seconds, 1.5 minutes. You have to do that. So so effectively this becomes a classic high compute near real time requirement. Okay. So this is another application. Fourth application, I talked about the cognitive robotics, so like this telerobot avatar. So there are two pictures. So one picture, if you see, this is a very, like, it doesn't look like a person, but it is more of a single roller wheel robot with a kind of a tablet on the top, which kind of serves as the face of the robot. A company called Double builds it. So this can be a very good candidate for your telepresence kind of application. We are using it for telepresence. And for teleoperation, we are given, if the picture I have given, the picture of Sophia, because actually we are working with Sophia now. The Sophia till now today, if you see as a robot, it can only talk. So we are working with Sophia's maker, the Hansen Robotics. So actually to bring in arm to Sophia. So it will have an arm, it will be able to pick up things. And once you do that, then the teleoperation, what I was talking about, will become a reality. So, but if you think of these applications are very well understood, no? That's what I was talking about. So telepresence, teleoperation kind of things in multiple, the agile meeting, remote machine visit, machine inspection, remote healthcare. Like the robot you see on the right side, there is a requirement. We have kind of done a pilot, but we didn't deploy fully. Actually, there was a requirement in a Bangalore hospital to deploy this robot in a COVID ward. And actually, instead of the doctor and nurses going into the ward and increasing the risk of the infection, actually this robot went. So, and it had a sensor which could measure the heart rate and the breathing rate remotely, and there was a teleconferencing, video conferencing facility. Nurses were outside that COVID ward in a place, and this robot was moving around to actually do that. So you can understand the requirements that are coming in. So there are some this kind of things that are actually now becoming reality. Other requirement is more closer to home. Like I think many of you may have a Alexa at home, or many of you use the Google Now or the Siri or the Cortana. All of them are actually speech recognition, or we call it ASR, or automatic speech recognition systems. But I don't know whether they have realized it. None of them actually works if you don't have an internet connectivity. What it means is that actually the deep learning and the actual speech recognition is actually happening in the cloud. Now, what is the problem? So that is okay for if we are talking about our home, we are talking about our personal things, it is okay. At least that if the data goes, the privacy, there is an issue, but there is no other issue. But think of if I use this to create a chatbot that actually talks about, it's a kind of a chatbot that works for a bank. So now the bank will be very, very uncomfortable for this data to go to Google or Amazon or a Microsoft or Apple's cloud, because there's a financial data here. So effectively, that is why we now need to do. So what I mean by that, this becomes a ASR or speech recognition at edge, and till today it is an unsolved problem. It's not solved fully. So there is no working ASR at edge which can actually reliably detect everything without any help from the cloud. So this becomes a very interesting research problem. We are working on it. But that I think we have understood I could give an idea of the application use case. And the way it is done here is actually, it is not about it. If you actually, it is very difficult to build this kind of speech recognition system, which is very generic and it will understand every word in the English language. But if we can reduce the vocabulary, that's what you are saying, we can actually reduce the model size by a lot and we can run it on the edge itself. So like, suppose a robot, I am giving a command to the robot and the robot has to understand. So there will be only maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 words it has to understand. So it is a limited vocabulary system. So such limited vocabulary system, we are finding it is possible to build such systems on the edge only. So this is one example of that. So we can actually run deep learning models, but that runs on the edge with a smaller. Yeah. Similar examples, like say we participated in one of the competitions in Abu Dhabi, but this is a very real problem now. You can see that drones are now getting used to as a firefighter. It's a very common high-rise building. Drones are used for firefighting. But now today they're used with somebody is routing them using remote control. That is not a very optimal way or realistic way to do it. Ideal way, the drone should be autonomous. It should fly. It should detect where the fire is, go near it, douse the fire, and come out. It should be that kind of autonomous system. So then what you have to do, that like they think about it, it becomes a kind of a object recognition problem. It's a fire detection using a deep neural network. So that problem, then, but again, I can do it in a high-end multi-core CPU, GPU machine, but how to do it on a drone? So again, we did some very interesting work to actually how to partition, put something on multiple cores, put some acceleration on the edge, use some hardware accelerator, and try to make it everything on the edge itself, so that it does nothing needs to come back on the drone itself. Nothing needs to come back, because this again, because you cannot. These are very critical applications, so you cannot rely on the network. If the network goes down, then the drone will be completely unoperational. If I depend on this analytics to be done on the edge, on the cloud. And I was talking about the satellite application. So one application that is becoming more and more, I think, is important, what we call as low Earth orbit satellite, or we call it LEO satellites, which are mostly Earth observation. So they have this elliptic orbit, and at one part of it, it actually flies very low into the Earth. So it's quite close to the Earth. So that's why it can observe. And through that observation, I was telling, so we can actually have multiple applications. There's standard surveillance, defense application, border control applications are there. But there are also new applications for sustainability. Is the factory polluting? Is my green cover increasing? And maybe infrastructure. So suppose I have a large bridge. Can I inspect it from satellite if I have a very high resolution camera on the satellite? So there are multiple applications that are coming. But the problem that is coming, that the satellites are actually now getting equipped with more and more sensors. Earlier there was only one sensor, one camera, which we usually call this panchromatic imaging system, one band, or RGB 3-band. It's also I called color camera. But now what is happening, they are putting multispectral cameras, they are putting hyperspectral camera, they are putting synthetic aperture radar, they are putting lidars into satellites, because it is very rich here. But the problem is, whatever we put there, we have to realize one thing, the downlink from the satellite to Earth station, that bandwidth is limited. That is fixed for a long time, that is spectrum allocated. You cannot go beyond certain bandwidth. So even if I am collecting so much data, I cannot send all the data back to the ground station for analysis. So there is a need to actually analyze the data on the satellite itself, which again can be thought of as an edge-com device. So this becomes the other future challenge that we are started looking at requirements coming now, that how the satellite can be equipped with edge computers and how we can modify the algorithms, AI algorithms to run. Because satellites have their own issues. They have low battery requirement. They have some the weight issue. It cannot put very heavy things there. So how do you do that? So there will be issues there. So that kind of, I covered the application. So then maybe in next 15 minutes, I try to briefly cover the technologies that have been needed to actually achieve what I talked about. And and then I'll stop for the questions. So technology-wise, if you see, one part it is very clear. We saw a lot of applications with vision, which has to be done in real time. So what is needed is a kind of very robust vision processing pipeline, both 2D image and 3D image processing pipeline and video processing pipeline, which has to be very standardized so that we can actually take it, and because always there's a porting angle to it. So not only you have to run it in the air, but after that you have to kind of make sure you can fit it in the edge device. So to do that effectively, first thing is you have to have this kind of a standard type pipe. So we are building this kind of a vision processing pipeline, which is very standardized. So there's one requirement. Second requirement is very similar to that, whatever we have done for the vision. So instead of 2D data and 3D data, we can get 1D data, one-dimensional time series data, which is typically many sensor data is like that. Accelerometer, vibration, ECG, they're all that kind of data. So they have a different, so instead of image and vision processing, you have a signal processing pipeline followed by some kind of machine learning and deep learning systems. So this also has to be built. So unless these things are there, you cannot actually deploy them in the edge, because the problem is it is not that you can build a huge deep learning network and solve everything without any of the signal processing, anything. You feed the raw data and everything comes out of the deep learning. That kind of things are not going to work in the edge system. So you have to build this kind. And as you are telling, the signal processing at edge has its own challenges, and which is different from your image and speech processing or the text processing we do. And this is very interesting that I happened to meet Professor Josh Tannenbaum from MIT, I think 4 years back, and I actually had that. So there's a talk he gave where he actually quoted this, and it is very, I think it is very important to understand this, that there's no way you can have an AI system that is human-like that doesn't have language at the heart of it. Okay. What his meaning by that is, if you see the vision or our text, what we actually write in the social media, or you talk about speech, these are all human generated. This inherently has a structure, isn't it? It has it. So this inherent structure and grammar, if it is there, this structure, that structure is not difficult for an AI system to find it out. But suppose I give you a ECG data, I give a accelerometer vibration data, that structure is not visible just like that. I'll give a simple example what I mean by that structure. Suppose I give a very vibration which is kind of vibrating in 10 different frequencies. So 10 sinusoids, if I add, it kind of looks like a noise. Everything is changing. So if I feed that data to a deep learning system, it will not be able to understand it because there's no structure there, that grammar. How do we get 10? Here will become 10 picks in that FFT, very structured. If I fit 10 picks to my, that deep learning system will understand. So I'm just giving an example. So effectively, this morphology of the signal and having a grammar to describe it is a very important aspect of edge computing to bring the intelligence in the edge, because you don't have the, sometimes a human being can look at the data and find out the morphology by looking, but you don't have the luxury to doing that when you are doing it on the edge, and nothing can go back to that. So that makes this problem to be difficult. The other thing that we can do is that what I told. So effectively, suppose we have built this 1D, 2D, 3D models, large models are there, but these models will not fit into a edge device, because sometimes the model is I will see typically 1 GB, 2 GB size of deep learning models they come, but edge computer may have only 50 MB of memory or 100 MB of memory. So how do I fit it? So one way to fit it is actually this concept that they call as a knowledge distillation, or the concept of student-teacher network. What happens is and I think people who are actually have a control background, there's a technique called system identification, that I have my input and output, and from that I try to find out what is inside the system. So here what happens is that I have a teacher network, which is a very large network. It produces some input and output. I take only that input and output and try to model a much smaller student. So effectively by doing that, I am reducing the model size, but I may not be foregoing much of the accuracy. Like if you see, many cases we are getting results like we are actually reducing the size from 64 to 64 times to 200 times with accuracy drop of less than 0.1% to sometimes it's going up to still less than 10% loss. So that is what one way to see is for the image part. Same thing is happening on the sensor side. So many times within 5 to 10% loss of accuracy, we are able to actually get a compression of between 4 to almost 150 times compression. So this is another way to look at it. So this is another interesting area at which actually you can take a pre-trained existing deep learning model, and you can use this kind of student-teacher concept of knowledge distillation to reduce the size. This will be beyond the traditional way to reduce model size like pruning and quantization, which I think is a given. Everybody will be doing it. Third thing is that actually the third tool that we need to use is that I cannot only rely on compression. I may have to partition. Like, you always have multiple processors. Like this typical example, you'll have a processor with there's a neural compute stick or a Jetson GPU, or there is a FPGA or a RPi. There is a kind of a co-processor available with you with your core CPU. So now I have to decide how much of that I'll run on my co-processor, how much of that I'll run on the core CPU. And that partitioning is not easy for deep learning systems because it is a very complex network. So one approach is taken that full deep learning system is taken as a directed acyclic graph, and then that graph actually is used to kind of use graph cuts to see which cut actually is the most optimal to run from the compute, memory, bandwidth, all perspective. If you optimize, this is optimization problem. How do you do that? This is another approach to do it. And the last technology that is there actually that's coming very recently on the edge, I think this will be the future actually, the concept of neuromorphic computing and spiking neural network. Why it is important is if you see, one part is that whatever we do, we are up till now we are addressing them. I think if I told compression was addressing my memory issue and partitioning is addressing my CPU issue, but there was a battery issue also at the edge. It doesn't have infinite battery. And incidentally, if you see, our brain only takes 20 watts of power. And you can see in that scale where the CPU and the GPU lies. Okay. So how it is doing it? So that and this is the problem, that is this power problem is leading us to this von Neumann bottleneck. People what they're calling, or Moore's law. People are telling that Moore's law is no more valid, and the memory chips are becoming slower and cannot make more faster because of this issue. That and von Neumann architecture traditionally has this problem of you have the CPU and the memory separate, and the movement between you have to continuously move the data between the memory, and that is the bottleneck today. That's why you cannot go beyond certain speed anymore, and that is where the most of the heat gets generated. Okay, and that is where the most, because of that, power goes. So effectively, that part is where actually people have now started looking at what we call as the neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic does is two things. One part it does is it is like our brain. First thing it does is when it deals with the data, it doesn't deal with the data in a raw form. It deals with the data in a spiking form. And that's why, like in our eye, when I see something, first time I see everything. But from next time onwards, only the delta of that goes as a form of spike into our brain. So it's a kind of only the change. So the change, when a moment that I do that change, automatically that data becomes very sparse. And you can see that example, that is one of the demos that we did in NIPS conference last year, is actually that the data you see in the top, that dotted hand and all, it is actually the spiking data. So it is extremely sparse. So that itself reduces the compute cost. But to handle the spiking, the special kind of a network that comes out, which I call the fourth generation neural network, the deep neural networks, is called SNN, or spiking neural networks. So you feed this data to spiking neural networks, and there are very specialized chips now coming out. It is still not, I think none of them are still out in the market, but we are working with two sets. There's a company called BrainChip in Silicon Valley, and also Intel. They are very soon you'll see these things in the market. There'll be chips which will actually be optimized for spiking neural networks. So they claim that I think Akida brain chip already claims a 100x reduction in the power compared to a traditional CPU. Intel claims that it will be between 200 to 1000 times reduction of power when they bring out that chip. So that will be kind of become a game changer in this edge computing. So I think I'll just so this is kind of summarizes this actually. So you have all these different kind of edge hardware in the below. CPUs, there's a new open source CPUs are there now, RISC-V. Then your accelerators like GPUs, TPUs, FPGAs, AI chipsets, neuromorphic chips. This will be in the bottommost level. You have to kind of create systems which can actually do the learn, inferencing, and fusion at edge, which will run on these chips. So that is the, I would call the requirement that is going to be there. And the same thing what I told about I remember in the beginning I talked about the fog computing also. The difference is the fog computing where actually instead of the edge devices, this analytics will run on the network device. The difference is that network devices don't understand sensors. Here we did a very sensor specific analytics. Networks will only understand packets. So in the packet level you have to analyze, and then that sense, analyze, response cycle you can actually do with some intelligent system. So you can actually, so it can basically probe if the packet error rate is going high, you can actually change something in the network parameter to make it lower. So it kind of becomes a cognitive network or automated network that will become a part of your fog computing. And like I told, so effectively all this together is basically the software-defined intelligence systems that is going to be there, where software-defined sensing, networking, analytics. I think this actually we talked today as our EA part, and software-defined compute is the edge and the planning. I think all these things together, what I talked today, you can actually extract it out in this way: software-defined sensing, networking, analytics, computing, and planning and actuation. All this together, a robotics or software-defined intelligence system is going to come out. That is the future. That is that will be going into this kind of system, which moves from this perception to the cognition to the adoption, and then become the responsive. So there's a kind of a gradation or a gradation of intelligence into this kind of systems. So I will kind of, this is the end of my year, but I'll just tell you about two of the slightly soft issues, but very important issues that this edge AI is bringing in. One part of the thing is that, you know, when we are pushing the intelligence into the edge, we are kind of making kind of autonomous edge devices. But the downside of it is actually, as we have seen, I also kind of gave some here. Most of the time, any AI-driven intelligence system, the accuracy will be how much? If we get a 90% accuracy, you're very happy. Even if I get 99% accuracy, that means every time 100 times, once in 100 times, it will actually give wrong output, isn't it? So now the challenge is, can we really trust? Like say this remote control. This remote control can be trusted because it is very predictable. It's a 1,000 out of 1,000 times it will give the same output. But here I'll create a machine. Suppose I had an AI-driven remote control, so-called hypothetical, which has a 99% accuracy. So 1,000, if I kind of hit the channel off button 1,000 times in that, it will actually 10 times it will may go something else, do something else. And that is a soft problem that as a human being, are we ready to trust such machines? Because they're not predictable. Will you be able to trust a car, which maybe it's that kind of accuracy, same thing. 10 times out of 1,000 times when you hit your brake, it will go for accelerator. Will you trust such machine? You will not. So there is a concept, there's a problem here which you have to address. So AI machines will not be 100%, that AI at edge will be like that. And at cloud, it is still, we can make it, but edge devices will have there will be lacuna in the accuracy because of the limited compute power. But how do we trust machines? like that. And second part is about, because of that accuracy will not be there, and I'm doing very critical operations, like all the left thing what I have told, controlling machines, driving autonomous cars, predicting people's health, or monitoring plant processes. These are very critical operations. Huh? These are not same as detecting friends' faces on Facebook or understanding a voice command on Alexa, where a mistake is okay. But here a mistake can actually cause harm or deaths. So the next problem comes is who takes the liability of such AI-driven decisions. So it seems that without a human in loop, you cannot do it. So there has to be some human who has to now ultimately certify and take the liability of such decision. But the human, I'll come back to my first part now. A human, like suppose I give that ECG machine is giving my some diagnostic, a doctor has to look at it and then certify this is that way. Then it has to the patient. But will the doctor actually do that if that machine, that model that is used to predict is not interpretable? If you cannot explain that model to the doctor, why they will actually take liability of that? So now we are coming back to that explainability issue now. So it is a full cycle. So that is where actually the deep learning systems are becoming a big issue in many of deployment, real field deployment. And explainable AI, interpretable AI is becoming a hot field to work on. So with that, I'll end.